In 1983, a bank robbery in Johannesburg, South Africa, left everyone stunned. 3 men walked into the trust bank, calmly handed over empty bags, and politely asked the teller to fill them with cash. No shouting, no weapons, just a smooth and calculated heist. Minutes later, they were gone without a trace. But that was just the beginning. By the end of the day, 3 more banks had been hit in the exact same way, leaving law enforcement scrambling for answers. How were these robberies happening so quickly, and who were the men behind them? The answer was more shocking than anyone could have imagined. The mastermind wasn't just any criminal. He was a police officer, a decorated detective who knew every trick in the book and used it to his advantage. What followed would go down as one of the boldest and most notorious heist sprees in African history. Andrew Stander was born in 1946 in Transvaal, South Africa. Being a child of a police officer, Andrew had been pressured to walk in the footsteps of his father and become a police officer from an early age. After graduating high school, he joined the South African Police Training College near Pretoria in 1963 and passed the course with flying colors. His father was the principal of the academy at the time. Due to his father's powerful position in law enforcement, Andrew Stander was promoted to the rank of captain when he was just 26 years old. Shortly after that, he joined the Kempton Park Criminal Investigation Department and became a detective. Despite tasting success at such an early age, Andrew Stander wasn't fully satisfied with what he was doing and felt like he hadn't been allowed to choose what he wanted to become in life. This was the time when South Africa was undergoing an apartheid, and there was a great amount of political instability in the country. Things were going as usual for Andrew Stander until the country's political climate changed him and his life forever. In 1976, he saw his fellow officers shoot and kill 176 unarmed schoolchildren during the 1976 Soweto uprising in an effort to enforce apartheid. But this wasn't it. Andrew's personal life had started to shake as well, which also led him to make the decisions he made later in life. In the mid-1970s, Andrew divorced his wife over personal differences, but soon after the divorce, he found out that his wife was expecting, and he became a father to a child from his ex-wife. In order to give his wife a newborn emotional and financial support, Andrew remarried his ex-wife. However, the second marriage didn't change anything between his relationship with his wife, and he eventually had to divorce her again. In the late 1970s, Andrew Stander's life was going nowhere both personally and professionally, and South Africa's volatile political atmosphere made things even worse. This was the point when Andrew Stander decided to change the course of his life and decided to rob banks. Because of his career as a police officer and a detective, Andrew knew everything about banks and how they worked. So it didn't take him long to plan how he was going to rob buildings as secure as banks. On a usual day at work in Johannesburg in 1977, Stander decided to do his first robbery. During lunch break, he went to the airport, bought a ticket, and flew to Durban, which was around 500 kilometers from Johannesburg. This was the time when the security checks at airports were not as strict as in the 21st century. Because of the lenient security policies at the airports, Stander was able to carry a revolver with him. After landing in Durban, Andrew booked a car and drove straight to the bank. In the bank's car parking, Stander changed his look by putting on a wig and a mustache so nobody could see his actual face and recognize him. He then entered the bank and approached the cashier's desk. The woman at the desk looked at him with curiosity, trying to figure out what was going on. In the meanwhile, Andrew discreetly showed his gun to her, gave her an empty bag, and asked her to fill it with cash. Once the cashier was done filling the bag with cash, he silently got out of the bank, drove his car to the Durban airport, and flew back to Johannesburg on the very next flight. This all happened before other employees at the bank realized what truly had happened and called the police. It was one of the cleanest crimes to happen in South Africa at a time when the whole country was enveloped in violence. Stander even managed to go back to work before anybody noticed his absence and went about his business as usual for the rest of the day. His first bank robbery in Durban was a drop in the ocean considering how much he would make as a bank thief in the coming years. Between 1977 and 1980, Stander went on to rob nearly 30 banks, becoming one of South Africa's most wanted criminals. By 1980, he had gathered enough money to get an early retirement, but he chose to continue his job while robbing banks. During these 3 years, Stander was able to get away with his robberies because it was a time when people of color would normally be associated with such crimes. Stander's father's position in the police might have been another reason why it took the South African police almost 3 years before they caught him. As for the money Stander gathered from 2.5 dozen robberies, he used it to buy himself a new house and a car. But he didn't stop there and partnered with his best friend, Car van Deventer, to open a souvenir shop in Johannesburg. Car van Deventer had no idea that the person he was partnering with for business was a criminal, and the souvenir shop they had opened together was just a way for Stander to wash all his dirty money. During a party in December 1979, Stander proposed a new business to van Deventer. But this wasn't a usual proposal as opening a souvenir shop. Rather, Stander invited Car van Deventer to join him in his bank robberies. He told Deventer that he had a car waiting at the airport, and it wouldn't take them much time to rob a bank and earn some quick cash. Stander was hoping that his best friend would agree to become his partner in crime, but when Car van Deventer refused, Stander tried to play it all off as a joke. While offering Deventer a partnership in his criminal activities, Stander didn't know that Car van Deventer was also a secret member of South Africa's Bureau of State Security, or BOSS. Soon after asked him to join in his bank robberies, Car van Deventer informed his bosses that the person he had been running a souvenir shop with might be the bank robber the Bureau had been looking for the past couple of years. As a result, agents were sent to stake out a stolen car which was linked to Stander and was abandoned at the Jan Smuts airport. When the agents searched the car, they found a balaclava revolver, fake license plates, a satchel, and several other bank robbery paraphernalia. The BOS agents had found enough evidence to incriminate Stander, but only if and when he showed up in the airport's parking lot where the car was parked. For the next few weeks, the agents of the Bureau of State Security kept a close eye on the car and waited for Stander to make a move. The waiting game finally paid off when, after the 1979 Christmas and New Year holidays, Stander returned to his vehicle to collect his disguise from the car. The Bureau's agents watched as the police detective collected his belongings for the car under surveillance and then boarded a plane to Durban, where he had been committing bank robberies for a couple of years by that point. The agents didn't follow him to Durban. Rather, they waited at the Jan Smuts airport for him to be back from robbing another bank. When Stander returned to the parking lot of the Jan Smuts airport, he had a bag full of 4,000 rand in his hand. The agents from the Bureau of State Security immediately confronted him and asked him about the money in the bag. Stander did not have any clear and convincing explanation of where he acquired it and was arrested on the spot. According to estimates, Stander had stolen nearly 100,000 rand from banks between 1977 and 1980 when he was caught, which is equivalent to $190,000. While this wasn't a huge amount, it was precisely what helped him get away with his robberies for so long. By keeping his operations small and robbing only a few thousand from each of the robbers, Stander reduced the risk of getting caught by law enforcement authorities between 1977 and 1980. Stander knew that busting open a bank vault or taking hostages during his robberies would invite unwanted attention, which he didn't want. Besides this, Stander committed most of the bank robberies during his breaks from the office, which also required him to be quick and return to his desk before getting noticed. Since he had been in the police force for more than a decade, Stander knew all the ins and outs of the authorities' response to such crimes and would always make sure to get out of the scene before the police arrived. The average yearly income of a white South African in the late 70s was around 24,000 rand. By sticking to a simple method of bank robberies, Stander managed to climb up the economic ladder and evade the authorities for 3 years. The crime spree of the police detective came to an anticlimactic end when he was arrested and put on trial. While giving his official statement in court, Stander talked about what had led him to turn into a bank robber. According to Stander, he chose to become a bank robber because he was strongly opposed to the apartheid and the events that had been taking place in South Africa in recent years. He further added that he was disgusted at how the police were being used to suppress peaceful protesters and torture political opponents. Stander mentioned the 1976 Soweto student uprising during his hearing and told the court that his disillusionment with police service started when he and his colleagues shot and killed 176 unarmed schoolchildren. On the 16th of June 1976, the students in Soweto Township launched a protest against apartheid, which soon resulted in protests by South Africa's black community in other areas of the country as well, including Tembisa, where shooting took place. Stander claimed that when the government decided to quash the uprising with force, he was one of the police officers who had shot at the protesters. However, despite Anders' claims that he was forced to open fire on unarmed protesters, the record showed that Stander wasn't present with the police contingent at Tembisa at the time of the shooting. While Stander had made sweeping claims about why he chose to enter the world of crime, not everyone was ready to accept his explanation. The reason for this was his police career. Stander had done his national service in Angola during the South African Border War and returned to a desk job afterward. Many believe that the new settings might not have been as thrilling for Stander as his initial years during his posting in Angola. So he decided to rob banks along with his job. After a months-long trial and arguments from both prosecution and defense, on May 6, 1980, Stander was sentenced to 75 years in prison for his crimes between 1977 and 1980. Since sentences for some of the charges against Stander could be served simultaneously, the total amount of time he had to spend behind bars was 17 years. He was also stripped of his police badge and was transferred to Zonderwater Maximum Security Prison in Cullinan, South Africa. While this would be the end of the road for many criminals, the tale of Stander was just getting started, and things were going to get even more serious than before. While at prison, Stander didn't waste time counting the days to his release, rather started making new friends, because he had something even bigger than before in mind. He soon developed a reputation as one of the bravest and toughest bank robbers in South Africa's history, which helped him command respect among other inmates in the facility. Soon, Stander became good friends with another bank robber named Alan Hale. Hale wasn't as prolific a robber as Stander and had managed to do only 5 bank robberies before getting caught. The two men traded their robbery secrets and shared a love of political philosophy. In the later years of his life, Hale noted that Stander was so opposed to South Africa's oppressive regime that he even refused to speak their official language, Afrikaans. According to Hale, Stander thought that the banks were the very symbol of greed, duplicity, and exploitation, and therefore should be robbed. Hale also shared this point of view with Stander, which helped them both become an ideal company for each other. It wasn't too long after that the two friends started planning to break out of the prison one day. The plan included one of them breaking out first and then coming back to get the other. On the 11th of August 1983, 3 years after his sentencing and imprisonment, Stander finally got a chance to act upon his plan of prison break. While attending a physiotherapy session with another inmate, Patrick McCall, the two inmates overpowered the guards, took their weapons, and stole the physiotherapist's car to run away. After evading the police for a few hours, they pulled up on a farmhouse and forced the owner, Martin Reichert, to call the police at gunpoint. While it was a strange move for the inmates who had just broken out of jail, Stander knew exactly what he was doing. He knew the area was full of police roadblocks, and the only way to pass them was by using a police van. When the police officers arrived at the farmhouse, the two convicts took them hostage, changed clothes with them, forced the farmer and the cops into the back of the van, and drove off. While the two inmates had successfully broken out of prison, they had no intention of living a life hiding from the police. Shortly after the prison break, robbed 13,000 rands from a building society and started planning to get Alan Hale out of prison. On October 31st, 1983, a little over 2 months after Stander and McCall had broken out of jail, they managed to get Hale out while he was attending a trade certification exam. Stander and Patrick McCall had once again taken the prison guards hostages and removed their weapons. The three of them fled in a getaway car to a safe house north of the town, which would be the headquarters for their criminal activities in the following month. Once the news of a second breakout became public, the media quickly started calling the three convicts the Stander Gang. Now, Stander wasn't alone and had two other reliable people to resume his streak of bank robberies. The three robbers started robbing banks in the same non-violent way as Stander used to do before getting caught in 1980. When the police started investigating an increasing number of bank robberies in Johannesburg, it became clear that Stander was the person behind all those crimes. Chris Sullivan, a reporter from The Guardian, received an audio recording from Alan Hale who explained that the gang had a rule that they would not shout, flash guns, or do anything violent during their robberies. He further revealed the purpose of the exercise was not to terrorize people, but to get in and out of the bank as quickly as possible, because the gang would normally rob 3 to 4 banks in a day. The Stander Gang was extremely daring in its robberies. In early 1984, they even robbed a bank on the bottom floor of the very same building where a police task force was set up to catch the gang. But sometimes this kind of act also meant coming close to trouble. During one such occasion, Stander had to pretend to be a jogger to get past a police checkpost. He also had to run from a restaurant once after the owner recognized who he truly was. The gang went on to rob a total of 500,000 rands, equivalent to $1 million in today's currency, which was 5 times as much as Stander had robbed when he used to operate alone between 1977 and 1980. Stander, Alan Hale, and Patrick McCall spent the money on extravagance and had plans to keep going with the bank robberies until their love for the female company changed things. On January 25, 1984, a hidden camera in one of the banks took pictures of gang members, which were immediately released to the newspapers by law enforcement authorities in an attempt to catch the culprits. Following the release, several women who had visited the Stander Gang's hideouts reported that they knew about the whereabouts of the criminals. At the time when the gang's pictures were released, Stander was in Florida, USA. As for the rest of the two members, they realized that it was time to split as there was a greater chance of them getting caught if they were seen together. While Hale left the hideout, Patrick McCall refused to follow them and decided to stay at one of the hideouts because he thought it was safer there. But just 3 days later, his decision proved to be fatal when the police force surrounded the safe house and he was gunned down during an exchange of fire with the authorities. The police asked McCall to surrender to the authorities, but instead, he opened fire on them, which forced the police to return fire, and when the officers entered the hideout after McCall's gun was silenced, he was found lying dead on the floor. As for Alan Hale, he made his way to Greece and spent the next year moving from place to place in Europe while trying to evade arrest. In 1985, Alan Hale was arrested at a bank in the United Kingdom while he was trying to reclaim his loot from a previous bank robbery. He was convicted of robbery and the use of a firearm, and a British court sentenced him to 9 years in prison. After completing his sentence in the United Kingdom, Hale was extradited to South Africa to face the law in his home country. He was charged with robbery along with other charges and spent the next decade in South African prisons before getting released on parole in 2005. At the time when Patrick McCall was gunned down by authorities and Alan Hale was on the run in Europe, Stander was in Fort Lauderdale, Florida to negotiate the sale of a yacht the gang had purchased to facilitate their escape from South Africa. The gang members believed that they had robbed enough money to live a comfortable life ahead. So they purchased a yacht as part of their plans to escape from South Africa forever. However, while in Florida, Stander found out that one of his friends, Patrick McCall, had been shot dead by the police, and another member of the Stander gang, Alan Hale, had run to Europe to avoid arrest and imprisonment for their recent activities. To make things worse, he also discovered that the South African authorities had an international warrant for his arrest. The arrest warrant also meant that the yacht, for which Stander had come to the United States, had also been seized. To evade arrest by American law enforcement authorities, Andrew Stander decided to create a false identity and started presenting himself as an Australian author named Peter Harris. He even managed to get a fake passport to prove his new identity. Stander managed to successfully lead his life as an Australian, even when he was arrested in February 1984 for driving an unregistered car with fake license plates. The local police thought of him as an Australian named Peter Harris and let him go without realizing that he was an international fugitive. Stander didn't stop with his daring acts even in the United States and decided to steal the unregistered car from police custody and tried getting it repainted and selling it to a local car dealer. By this time, the news of Andrew Stander being a fugitive had been published in the local newspapers. Therefore, the car dealer quickly realized that the person he was dealing with was an international fugitive and informed the police. The police quickly raided his residence but didn't find Stander there because he had just left to ride a bike around the city. When Andrew Stander returned to his residence, he was encountered by Officer Michael Van Stetina, who was guarding the perimeter. Knowing that he had been caught and his days as a fugitive were over, Andrew Stander made one last try to get away from the scene. He tried to get a hold of the officer's shotgun and in the process took a shell to the stomach and fell to the ground. An ambulance was immediately called by the police, but by the time paramedics arrived, South Africa's most wanted man was already dead, marking an end to the story of a South African police officer who turned into a bank robber and was able to fool authorities several times during his criminal career. If you enjoyed this video, hit the like button. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more interesting videos.